Brown Jackson, but they were joined by so-called conservative justices John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett. So in response to this ruling, which shocked many, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, drafted a letter, not simply to the administration, but to the world. And here's part of what it says. Under President Biden's lawless border policies, more than 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years. That is more than the population of 33 different states in this country. This illegal refusal to protect the states has inflicted unprecedented harm on the people all across the United States. Abbott goes on to say the state of Texas has the authority under the Constitution to, quote, protect itself. That authority is the supreme law of the land, and it supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. And then, following very quickly, 25 other states with Republican governors signed a letter pledging their support to Texas and its constitutional right to defend itself and this country. Those states include Ohio, Florida, Utah, Nevada, and many others. And then the Biden administration responded. The administration threatened these states, and particularly Texas, with a, quote, 24-hour deadline to allow Border Patrol to reopen the border and to take down the barbed wire. Clearly a collision course. What happens next? We're thankful to be joined now by Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, who joins us by phone from India. Governor Abbott, thank you so much for joining us. If the administration declares that it plans to federalize the National Guard of the state of Texas, your National Guard, what will be your response?
Well, first, I'll be shocked. That would be a boneheaded move on his part, a total disaster. But for one, as you might imagine, we are prepared in the event that that unlikely event does occur to make sure that we will be able to continue exactly what we've been doing over the past month, and that is building these barriers, and whether it be the concertina wire or other anti-crime border barriers, whatever we've been building, the Biden administration is now trying to attack us because of it. And we will continue to do exactly what we're doing to expand our denial of illegal entry into the state of Texas.
With state employees, I assume, not with National Guard, but can you envision a scenario in which you would put armed state employees on the border instead of the National Guard of Texas?
We do have other armed state employees on the border as we speak right this minute, and that's the Texas Department of Public Safety, as well as other law enforcement officers, as well as National Guard from other states. And you can be assured there will be more National Guard from other states and more law enforcement officers within the state of Texas and other states. And, Tucker, I just signed a new law in the state of Texas that will go into effect on March the 5th that authorizes any law enforcement officer in the state of Texas to be able to arrest anybody coming across the border illegally.
Have you spoken to the president or anyone from the Biden White House about what appears to be an imminent collision?
I have not, to be clear. I have spoken to the president about the border. I met him on a tarmac in El Paso and talked to him directly about what was going on. I handed him a letter that had in it immediate solutions he could take that would immediately secure the border without the need of any new law to be passed. Despite the fact that I handed him on altogether 8 different letters, he has refused to ever respond. My point in telling you that, we have laid down the precursor of what's called Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution to show that we have been invaded and we have demanded support from the president to safeguard our state, and they have refused to do so 8 times, and that authorized me to declare an invasion under Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution to make sure that Texas is going to be able to use every tool in our arsenal to defend our state.
Of the couple of dozen Republican-led states who've pledged support for you, how many do you think would send National Guard to Texas?
I'll be shocked and disappointed if almost all of them do not send. There have been about 10 so far that have sent National Guard or other law enforcement. They now are joined together with us, and this is a fight for the future of America, and they all know it. And so I believe that they will all be in on December.
It's just a remarkable moment, and I know you're heading out, but my final question is, how do you see this resolving? What happens next?
Well, Texas is going to continue to expand the border barriers that we are erecting, the razor wire that we're putting up, and to continue to gain control of more land over the coming months. I believe, however, that this will all come to an end on January the 20th of next year. because I believe a new president will be sworn in, a president who will actually enforce the immigration laws of the entire country, not just the Texas border, but New Mexico and Arizona and California and the Canadian border also. And we will have safe and secure borders once again because we will have a president who actually will enforce the laws of the United States of America.
But in the next year, are you concerned about any kind of conflict between state forces, whether state employees or National Guard, and federal forces?
So, Tucker, all we can do is be as prepared as possible, deploy as many people as possible, do as much as possible to put up more border barriers and deny illegal entry. And our head is down. We're working hard, regardless of what the Biden administration is doing.
Governor Greg Abbott of Texas joining us now from India. Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you. Take care.
The state of Texas appears to be on a kind of collision course with the Biden administration, with the federal government over the southern border. Can it be protected, or must the invasion continue? The Supreme Court has weighed in on this to some limited extent, but it hasn't solved the problem or answered the question. So what happens now? Things are moving very quickly, and it seemed like there was no one better to tell us what the future may hold than the Attorney General of the state in question, Ken Paxton, who joins us now. Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for coming on. So that's the question. Where does this go? It seems like there are two large forces speeding toward each other, no one's swerving. What happens, do you think?
I don't think anybody knows exactly what happened because we're in uncharted territory where we have a federal government that is largely not just ignored federal law, not just ignored their constitutional role to protect the state and the country. They're actually participating with the cartels and bringing people here as fast as they possibly can. I just don't think we've ever seen anything like this in our country where we have a federal government not just not doing their job, but affirmatively working with bad people to do bad things to the country. I don't remember anything like this.
So can I just ask you to stop there, since you're a law enforcement, you're the chief law enforcement officer of your state. Can you assess whether what the Biden administration is doing now is, strictly speaking, criminal? Are they breaking the law in how they're handling the border?
I think they are. I mean, they're taking federal law and dismantling it. He has a constitutional duty to implement what has been put in place by the elected representatives.
Yes.
And he's just not doing that, and he's making up his own rules as we go that allow the cartels to gain a foothold, a really strong foothold in the United States, not just in my state, but really across they're building a network across the country so that they can keep doing this well after Biden's gone.
So just to the next few days or weeks or months or who knows, the Biden administration has effectively threatened your state and said you've got 24 hours to do something. What are they demanding that you do, and where does this go short term, do you think?
I'm not exactly sure what we're supposed to do. I mean, is it we're supposed to let them help them cut down wire and fences? We weren't ordered to do that by anybody that I know of, and so we have no obligation to help them violate federal law, and we're not going to do it. And I don't think Abbott's going to give in. I certainly don't plan on giving in. So they're pushing us to help them, and we're not going to help them violate federal law. We're going to try to defend our border the best we can with the resources we have. And, my job is to do it in court. Abbott has other resources at his disposal, and I hope he uses every single one of them to stop this.
The governor, Greg Abbott, told us this morning from India that there are at least 10 states that have sent National Guard to Texas. Has something like this ever happened in the last, say, 100 years that you're aware of?
I know that they've sent different states. I know Ron DeSantis has sent troops, and I believe Ducey, when he was in office, sent troops. But nothing to this scale, nothing since the Civil War that I know such a conflict has existed between the federal government and the states. This is really new territory for us. I think it's new territory for anybody living, because we have not seen this type of conflict between the federal government basically ignoring all of their duties. And I can't even imagine actually Texas, when it came into the Union, agreeing to come into the Union if they knew that the federal government wasn't going to defend the border. That would have never happened. I'm not sure there would have ever been a constitution that was joined by states if they ever thought that the federal government wasn't going to defend them. And if they didn't, they couldn't do anything. The states couldn't do anything about it. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. They did never imagine that a dictator president would decide to change the population to win elections forever. I don't think that even entered their minds. So what would happen if Biden decides to, quote, federalize the National Guard of Texas?
Look, he can do that. Any president can do that. I think that that pretty much ends his election possibilities. Not that they're that good now anyway, but this is becoming the number one issue. When you come into a state like Texas, that I think people can clearly see, we're just trying to protect ourselves from crime and terrorism and a lot of bad consequences. I don't think now these liberal sanctuary cities know the same problem. They've got just a little bit of what we have, and they know that this is real. So I think it's becoming more, Americans are becoming more aware, and I think if Joe Biden decides to force that onto us by taking over the National Guard, I think it's an automatic loss. He's done. And so, in some ways, we have to suffer with the consequences for a few months if he does that, which I still hope he doesn't. But in the end, he loses the election absolutely if he does that.
Do you think it's possible that he will? I mean, I guess it's possible to know, but what would you rate the likelihood?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really think Biden's thinking about this much. I think it's his handlers, whoever's behind the scenes, making those decisions. If I knew who that was, I could probably better give you an answer. But, I have no idea what he'll do because I don't think he knows what he's going to do. And after he's done, I'm not sure he even would recognize what he did. So if I knew who was making that decision, I could actually direct questions at him, or somebody could, I think that would be helpful. But we don't know who's running the country right now.
Yeah, no, I don't. I've never met someone who could answer conclusively who's in charge of the United States. Obviously, it's not him. So what does Texas, in the meantime, plan to do to secure the border on behalf of the whole country, by the way, not just your state, but all of us? What are you going to do?
Yeah, we're fighting for our lives. We have several lawsuits. This one comes back to the Fifth Circuit. So we're back in court on this very issue of them cutting down our wire. So it's not over, and I'm still hopeful that somewhere along the way the Supreme Court will figure this out and realize the damage that they're creating for the states and the conflict that they're allowing between the federal government and the states, that they should just not do. They should require that if there's federal law and there's a constitution, that it be enforced. So, but we have other cases that we're dealing with. We've got the Shelby Park case where we've taken control of that park. And I think the governor's just going to hold on to it. And I think we also have this March 5th date looming where we've already been sued by the federal government, by the ACLU, because the state has passed laws that go into effect in March where we can deport people that are here illegally. And we're going to do it. So we've got a lot of conflict ahead. We got the Bowie's case, which is also up at the Fifth Circuit, which will be heard by the entire court, I think, in the coming months. So there's numerous cases where the courts still have a chance to actually force the president to follow the Constitution and protect the American people.
This is uncomfortable. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, because it's not about you. It's about someone you work with. But for 3 years, the governor of Texas hasn't done a lot to protect the country from illegal immigration. I would argue very frustrating to watch. All of a sudden, he's taken center stage, and he seems pretty resolved, pretty resolute on this question. Is it your sense that this is a genuine change of heart?
It sure looks like it. I mean, I think just the numerous incidences that we've tried to stop this legally, and they just keep changing up what they do. So we'll win, or we'll get some version of winning, and then they come back and try something else. So I think he has become ultimately frustrated with this, and once he's resolute, I don't think he's backing down. I think he will fight this to the bitter end. And he realizes the consequences of us not doing that is we're going to lose American lives. We've got kids dying from fentanyl overdoses. We know that we've got people crossing the border that are terrorists, and we're not catching them. And we know that we're going to be dealing with the cost of this for decades. And it's insurmountable if we let this continue.
Yeah. So you mentioned a moment ago the cartels and their role in this. Can you expand on that? And I'm not sure most Americans understand the hold that drug and human trafficking cartels from Latin America now have in the U.S. What do you know about that?
I know that they have become significantly more powerful during the Biden administration because the money that they're making has massively increased from the time that Trump was in office, because Trump was doing things like enforcing federal law that actually worked. And a lot of people say we need to fix our immigration system. Well, maybe we do, but we certainly need to enforce the laws we have. We know that it works because Trump did it. Since that time, the cartels have worked with the Chinese in importing fentanyl. We've lost thousands and thousands of kids and over 100,000 Americans to fentanyl overdoses, and they had no idea that they were taking fentanyl. And so the challenge that we have in front of us is we have the cartels making $10,000 to $12,000 a person. So the more people they bring into the country, the more money they make, and the more they're able to build their network. And they're not going to want to give this up when they're making billions of dollars on drugs, human trafficking, sex trafficking, other crimes, and importing people. I think it's going to, as they gain power and they gain more assets, that network is getting built out during Biden's administration, and the next president, hopefully Trump, is going to get stuck with dealing with that.
So you're the Attorney General of one state out of 50. Merrick Garland's the Attorney General of all 50 states. If you know this, he must know this. Why has Merrick Garland, apart from the obvious answer, he hates America, but why hasn't he done anything about this?
So I think this is this is clearly a plan, right? This is a strategy. It's just like their election strategies. This is a strategy that started on day one when Joe Biden said, well, we're not going to deport anybody. And of course, he brought people in like Merrick Garland who were fine with not enforcing federal law, who didn't care if the Constitution was honored by the president or him. And so their goal is simple. I think it's two things. They want more votes, and this is a way of getting them here. And then they'll want to give amnesty. And they are bringing them mostly to Republican states. And they also want to hurt Republican states, I believe, because there are costs associated with this. And right now in America, people are voting with their feet. They're leaving California, Illinois, New York, and they're going to Florida, and they're going to Texas, and they're going to Tennessee. They're going to Republican states because it's a better life, and they don't have to deal with the higher taxes and the regulations, and they're going to have a better life for their families. And so the Democrats realize this. Biden and his team realize this. So part of the way of dealing with that is, well, let's just hurt Republican states. Let's bring more crime for them to deal with, so it's less likely that people want to go there. Let's bring in more costs, so they have to have higher taxes to pay for all this illegal immigration that they didn't ask for, but the federal government brought to them. So I think it's a twofold strategy. Harm the Republican states, do as much damage, and if it means some kids die or some people die, they are willing to trade that to get the votes and the damage to Republican states. And people would say, how cynical, but I'm looking at what they're doing, not what they're saying.
In the 1980s, when I lived there, California was the richest state, the least corrupt state, had the best schools, the best roads. And now, of course, it's the most corrupt state, one-party state, and it's unlivable. And immigration did that. No other thing did that, just immigration. So why wouldn't that happen in Texas, which has been their goal from the beginning anyway?
It's going to happen. It's going to happen all over the country, particularly in Republican states, because that's where they're bringing most of the illegals. That is the strategy. Fill up the Republican states to deal with the problems, the crime, the costs, and then also, hey, there'll be more voters. They'll have kids. Those people will vote, and they presume that those votes will go their way. And that's the strategy, because if you turn Texas and a few other states Democrat, we effectively are California. We have a one-party system where there's not accountability, there's not competition, there's not a way for the voters to change things if the system is rigged so that only one party is in power. And that is ultimately the strategy of the Democratic Party. Create one party where the voters don't have a choice.
So I think what you're saying is factually supported. I mean this with respect. I think it's very obvious. Why is this so clear to you and not at all clear to, say, 95% of Republican senators in Washington?
You know, that's a good question. It seems so obvious to me. I don't know why it wouldn't be obvious to most of our leadership, but it's true even in Texas. You know, we have a Texas House that is cooperating with the Biden administration to do a lot of bad things, including trying to impeach me. And I don't understand that either, but they're willing individually to, at least in the Texas House, sell out for power, for their own personal power, for their own personal benefit, instead of doing things like protect the state on election integrity or the border or participate in things that really matter to our voters. They're listening to the House Democrats who are directed by the Biden administration. And of course, our speaker ends up being elected by House Democrats. So there's a lot of infiltration. The Democrats have infiltrated the Republican Party, and they've been very smart about it. And even though we're a majority state of Republicans, they control the Texas House. And so I don't know if that's what's going on in Washington, because I don't have as much time to pay attention to it. But it's very clear, and it should be very obvious to every American, let alone every Republican, that we are moving towards a one-party system, and that is the goal.
Is that the same Speaker of the House in Texas who was videotaped drunk in the House?
Yeah, he's running for re-election. He's got a really great opponent, David Covey, and hopefully that guy will beat him. We're also running a lot of challengers against some of these very bad Republicans, and we're hopeful that we'll have a lot of wins, enough wins that Dade Phelan won't be Speaker, and we can hopefully have a Republican Speaker elected by Republicans and not Democrats. That's where we're trying to go.
Someone who's
and unfortunately,
not
for the last
the
15
job.
years, the Democrats have that guy. You saw him. I mean, it's clear
out of control.
where his priorities are. They're out of control. Yeah, it's like a frat house down there,
and not in a fun way. Last question. I'm in Texas a lot. I have a lot of family who live there, and people I know who are in Texas every day say that it's very obvious, just from living there, driving around there, that this invasion has degraded the quality of life in the state. Do you feel that?
Yeah. I mean, you feel it especially in the large cities, but it depends. You can find other little cities that were overrun as well. But like, in Austin, I have to be there a lot. I live in more of the Dallas area, but in Austin, for sure, you see the crime, the fact that I don't really want to be downtown like I used to. I used to be downtown all the time because that's where the capital is. And I find myself not feeling as safe because I know the crime rates are higher. And part of that is this huge problem with illegal immigration. That's true in, I think, a lot of our major cities here. And it's going to get worse. And my even bigger fear is this whole thing with these terrorist cells that I believe they're being established now because we aren't controlling the border.
I mean, the schools and hospitals of Texas are paid for by American citizens, Texans, for their benefit. How could they possibly handle an influx of people this large? Like, what's it like to go to the emergency room in San Angelo right now or San Antonio? What's that like?
I think especially a lot of these smaller hospitals are going out of business. They just can't afford the Medicaid costs that they're incurring as a result of this illegal immigration problem. And I think you're going to see more hospitals go out of business. I mean, you saw what happened in New York. They were clearing out of school so that illegals could come to school, and the kids that are from there can't even go. That's going to be more and more of a problem as these numbers continue to increase. We're going to all feel it, and it's just a matter of time before the entire nation directly feels this, and that's going to continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, there needs to be some very vigorous response to that because that's the destruction of our nation. So I appreciate Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas. Thank you for the time and for that explanation.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. There's not one power center in this country, the media, the government at all levels and both parties, big business. There's not one power center in the United States that would like to see secure borders. And so, of course, we haven't had secure borders, and now we're being invaded, and no one's really doing anything about it. So it's just a matter of time before citizens who love their country, in many cases who have served their country overseas, decided to get a little more active in protecting their country. And that's why we're about to see the Take Our Border Back convoy. It begins on January 29th. Truckers, bikers, anyone who wants to come and protect the United States and demand that our government secure our southern border is welcome. They'll be driving to Texas, and one of the people who will help them navigate that state is Doc Pete Chambers. Chambers is, true to his title, a physician. He's a former Green Beret. He was recently down in Eagle Pass, Texas. So not surprisingly, Doc Pete Chambers has been attacked by dying legacy media outlets as a deeply scary person, because your country being invaded is not scary. It's all totally normal. We thought it would be worth talking to Doc Pete Chambers about what he expects to happen with this convoy and his role in it. He joins us now. Dr. Chambers, thank you so much for coming on.
It's great to be here, Tucker.
So what can we expect with this convoy? Can you describe what it is and what its purpose is?
Right. This is a peaceful assembly. This is what we do as Americans. This is how we shed light to a subject. This shedding of the light will result in exposing really what an open border policy looks like.
Yes.
We know that we know the problem sets in Texas, but literally I promise you this, that 40 miles north of that border, there will be people that will never have heard of the border problem because they just watch mainstream media.
Yes.
And so this is what that is about.
And so can you tell us the route of the convoy and who you expect to join it?
Right. So right now they're going to be leaving out of on the 29th, Virginia Beach, which is where the 1607 Covenant, the landing, which signified the John Smith landing in 1607, where they planted a cross on the beach and said, "Hey, this is a covenant to this nation, to God." And then they're going to leave from there, and they're going to go down through Florida. They're going to cut across Highway 10 through Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Houston, into Dripping Springs, Texas, where I'll be working out of, and then on to near Eagle Pass. Now, I'm part of the advisory of this, and as I advised, I used to be in that same unit that's down there. That's the unit that has a streamer on it from the Alamo. It's a very historic Texas unit. And so they are down there holding line. And I know those soldiers. I worked with them. I took care of them as a doctor with Operation Lone Star. They're busy. So the convoy is going to go just a little bit shy, just a little bit to the north, really, in an area about 30 miles away in Quemado, Texas, to a children's camp. A beautiful lady down there who has taken care of orphans and widows. You can't write this stuff in a book. I couldn't make this up. But she was overrun, first of all, by the COVID mandates that said you got to shut down. You can't keep running this shelter, number one. Number two, she was overrun by the numbers of volumes of illegals that were coming through her neighborhood, trying to get into her food pantry. And then number three, the cartels are a significant presence in that area because that is the end point of where they do the end around. So we are looking at the bright, shiny object that is Eagle Pass. That's a bright, shiny object. Look here. The droids that you're not looking for, if you will, are just to the north, right in that location. And so what this is going to do is it's going to bring light to it, because we have to understand that there is a constitution, both state and federal, and that we have to, number one, expose those that argue things in the Hegelian dialectics, if you will, of tort law, and look at the Constitution, which is exactly what this is a focus on. The Constitution, we the people. That's why we the people will be riding along, mama bears, cops, veterans, truckers, and going to that location to bring light. There is nothing nefarious about this. There is, matter of fact, I am suggesting to them that they and they know this, that this is a peaceful demonstration. This is how this will be.
Who's paying for this? I assume George Soros is not. The private equity oligarchs and the hedge fund managers probably not sending cash to finance this whole thing. Is it self-financed?
This is self-financed. This is Give, Send, Go. If you go to the takeourborderback.com website, there's a way to find that. But this is unlike what I saw on the border, and I can tell you who all the actors are with that, and there would be a longer discussion where that money comes from. Perhaps we should go to Mexico first and drive across the border at the point of entry and just say, hey, we need one of those bags of cash that you're giving out to the illegal folks.
Who's giving those bags of cash out, do you think?
That is, it's many different ways, but sometimes through charities when they do get to the U.S. side. Sometimes UNESCO, a UN organization under the IOM, who is going to hand them a card, really, it's a debit card, with a phone, and that is funded illegally through the United States back channels into UNESCO. And that money's been tracked, and we know about this. We have the receipts on it, and it'll just take time to keep elucidating those that aren't listening in D.C.
I'm a little confused, though. I mean, if you commit an armed robbery and I drive you from the liquor store to my house and put you up for the night, I'm an accessory to your crime and I can be arrested. If there are UN officials abetting crimes against the United States, why aren't they in prison? Why aren't they arrested immediately?
Exactly. And if there are people that have taken an oath to the Constitution who are also in that line of decision-making processes, the U.S. Constitution says this, and this is why I know that everyone in the government should agree with me. The same oath that I took, they took. If they don't follow that, they're either aiding or abetting, they are treasonous, or they are it is dereliction of duty. So yeah, there's a lot of things that should be accountable, and that is one of the things that is that we're seeking. Is you got to shed light on it to get the accountability.
I'm really struck as I watch massive protests in Europe against the carbon tyranny by farmers, for example, in Germany, that we don't have anything like that here. We haven't had a large-scale protest against the people in charge since January 6th, over 3 years ago, and that, of course, was the point of persecuting the innocent that day, was to stop future protests, and it's worked.
Mhm.
Are you concerned that this protest is ripe for subversion by the intel agencies, by the Biden administration, and that you'll be persecuted in the way that the January 6th protesters were?
I'm not concerned in a sense for personal concern, but I'm concerned that that a bad light would be shed prior to. It already has, and that's okay. That people have a right for that. We fought for that, but it's not okay to disparage something that is that has a really peaceful intent. But understand this: that because of comfort in this country, sometimes people don't stand up for what they believe is right, and that's a sin of omission. That's just as bad as being a perpetrator to me, in my personal opinion. So when I took off my uniform and left, and I say this, I'm in the army of God. There is no club. I think that they're trying to think there's an army of God who, they're going through the books right now trying to figure out where are these guys at. This is just a figurative speech because I don't worry about what man thinks about me. I adhere to the law and I take care of those that are oppressed. That's what a Green Beret does. And I didn't take off the uniform and just say, well, now I'm just going to go, willy-nilly. Didn't change my character. So yeah, I'm not worried about what those people think. Let me explain a little story. This is an interesting one. You're going to like this. In Del Rio, Texas, about a year and a half ago, 17,000 Haitians showed up at that bridge. I don't know if you remember them under the bridge and they were corralling them under. We were. Right. So I was in the chopper when we showed up, got on the ground, 50 National Guards, probably about 25 DPS guys, troopers, and maybe about 15, 20 the Custom Border Patrol. Now, my dog and myself held them off for about 12 hours on the border, just barking, right? Because we're getting overwhelmed. But at some point, they had to say, all right, we got to let them in. They're just coming across. That was the same time that horse whipping thing, he had the split reins. It looked like he was whipping. He wasn't. He was 400 meters away from me. That just was a camera shot. But here's what happens. Now we set it up. We got things under control. We're in an operations tent. And here comes the FBI, and they come busting in, and I'll never forget it. Lady comes in wearing a Hillary Clinton pantsuit and says, "Hey, there's a white supremacist group out here, and they're on the list." And I said, "Well, who are they?" And she said, "This particular organization." Don't remember. They were there providing sandwiches to us guys that were out there working all night and all day, and they were actually a Hispanic group from McAllen. So sometimes they might be a little wrong, but I think that the danger in this is those media sources that are actively provoking to do what's a globalist agenda to separate Americans, does that. They act on it because it's a story, right? But they take the story, instead of doing their own homework, they take that and come in and try to set the narrative with those of us on the tactical level, on the ground. And we just laughed at her and said, okay, thanks. Here's the flyer. Yeah. God, go get a sandwich from one of the supremacists.
To the liberal white lady mind, everyone they disagree with is a white supremacist. Just interested, whatever happened to those 17,000 Haitians who stormed our country illegally?
Great question.
Are they back in Haiti?
Well, Senor Mayorkas, he said that was going to happen, and that's not what happened because we followed the tail numbers. The planes went to, some of them flew out of Laughlin Air Force Base, which is a United States Air Force Base close to Del Rio. Some of them got on buses. The first or second bus that lit out of Del Rio, they overtook the bus driver and disappeared into the periphery of Texas. And then
what do you mean they overtook the bus driver?
They used force and stopped the bus driver and got off the bus and took off.
Then why aren't they in prison? I mean, what is this? I'm sorry to interrupt your story. That's
no. This is our life down here. This is what we see. It's ridiculousness. So for me, I'm not surprised by any of this. Particularly that night, that video that you played, that was 18 December. That ended up being about 12,500. But the rest of the story, about 3,000 of them went to the Civic Center in San Antonio, and that ended up being a job fair for the cartel. So we followed them, we as citizens, and figured out what they were doing was the cartel guys would drive up, and then it was like a hiring frenzy, like something on LinkedIn, but it was there in the Civic Center. And so we are aiding and abetting an invasion on not only on the border, but every state is a border state at this point.
It's hard to comprehend that no one's done anything about this for 3 years, and it'll be a completely different country in a decade because of this, and not a better one. Let me ask, you often hear this migrant wave described as, quote, military-age males. You spent a lot of time there.
Mhm.
What
Yep.
percentage would you say are military-age males?
That has changed. It predominantly was family units when I was down there a year ago.
Yep.
The 22nd of May was my last day in uniform last year. Now it is about 60%, and I'll just give you the numbers from that particular night on December the 18th. About 60% male. This particular group was primarily out of Venezuela, but when I get information that comes up to the border, because we have people all the way down into the Darien Gap that report to us, these are just citizens, former military guys, and they tell us what's going on. The next wave is going to be Yemenis. Think about this. They're bombing Yemen right now. The next thing you do is get displaced persons, just like they did in Hadalat Rukban camps in the Syrian-Jordan border. But Jordan sent them up through Europe. These are coming straight to the Darien Gap and coming to us. So, yes, there are more fighting age males now per capita because of the fact that, my opinion, most dangerous course of action, most likely, this is the spectrum. I have to think about the most dangerous, and it's to just destabilize this country. This is a Marxist technique. This could be mixed in with a little bit of Cloward-Piven doctrine. This could be mixed in with a little bit of Saul Alinsky to create a need for us to have the government save us. We're from the government. We're here to help you. All right. Well, no, because your tweet that you asked out there, I'm going to quote it, where are the Texans? I'm sitting there screaming, we're right here, and come and get on a horse and we'll show you. But we,
Yeah.
the people, are going to expose these things because we have to. This is our backyard. And there's nothing humanitarian about this. But we have to make sure that our legislators understand, because I've lost a lot of faith. I still have faith in a few. They have to understand that they have to adhere to that same oath. And many of them don't have an oath. And we've done some FOIAs and found that out as well. It's pretty interesting in the Biden administrations, particularly.
So
these,
I think most people, and I'm sure you're in this group, would like to live in a country where the government that they hire and pay for solves these problems, like securing the nation against invasion. But they're not, and so citizens are stepping into the breach. Do you have any hope that Governor Greg Abbott of Texas will change his longstanding policy of supporting open borders and really crack down? Do you think it's real?
You know, since I've been on the border, I've done numerous talks on the optics and the reality of Operation Lone Star since I got out, because I had to start telling the truth, because I just couldn't stand that what we were doing was 90% optics and 10% reality in stopping anything. We counted a lot of heads, and we apprehended, if you will, the numbers on a piece of paper. So now there is a constitutionally written document that came out the 24th, not 2 days ago, that is constitutionally driven. I love it. But we have to look at the way that they were arguing in court. And this is where I want, the citizens to do their part, is to talk to A.G. Paxton, who I admire and I've had discussion with, and say, you can't use tort law in the Fifth Circuit amicus brief. Exactly. If you look at the references, they didn't use the Constitution. They used tort law, case law. And that's never going to fly, because the job of the federal government is to provide security for this nation, period. Once again, I said, we agree that the oath is an oath. So if you agree on that, then you're going to be guilty of treason if you know that this is an invasion. It is. I mean, how many deaths of Americans, sometimes, and this is going to be ugly, but hacked to death. We've heard of stories that raped by illegals coming in, doing this. How many warrants this invasion? I mean, at what point do we say this is enough?
Really kind of amazing. Last question for you, Dr. Chambers, is your expectation that this will proceed peacefully, and will it end here? I mean, if Abbott, who clearly has been committed to open borders in effect, if not in word, if he doesn't secure the Texas border, like what happens next?
Well, there has to be some teeth in this declaration of emergency. He hasn't declared emergency border invasion. That has to be. We have to declare the cartels actually terrorist organizations, foreign terrorist organizations, transnational criminals, and then we have to go after that, because until we do that, there's no teeth in this. There's none right now. It'll be us standing in the line, protecting our individual properties, which we have a right to. but it's not how it be. As far as the convoy, it's going to go over fine, and there are going to be those naysayers. I'm not worried about that. We don't put our worries in that.
Yeah. Well, I hope they don't infiltrate it like they did January 6th and make you look like terrorists.
They may.
So Godspeed. Dr. Pete Chambers, thank you very much. Tucker Carlson tonight. On Tuesday, 2 days ago, Twitter slapped a warning label on all tweets from National Public Radio. Going forward, NPR will be identified for users of Elon Musk's social media site as, quote, state-affiliated media. That is the same category as Russia Today or China Central Television. It means that NPR is not that different from the Tehran Times, with the exception, of course, being less accurate and more anti-American. So that happened on Tuesday. Why are we telling you about it? With all the momentous changes underway around the world, why would we open a show with a story about Twitter recategorizing NPR as state media? Well, because it's true. That's the reason. Finally, thankfully, somebody in authority has told the truth about something, and that is thrilling to see on its own terms. In a world defined by lies from our leaders, this seemed like a rare sign of hope and progress. Telling the truth is the most revolutionary act of all, far more than taking up arms. And yet, you rarely see it. Human beings created language in order to describe the world around them more precisely than they could with, say, grunting or sign language. But unfortunately, we've been subverting our own creation ever since. But not tonight. By calling National Public Radio what it is, Elon Musk has used English as it was intended to be used in order to tell the truth. Of course, NPR is state media. Have you listened to it? It has all the hallmarks: repetitive dishonesty, authoritarian politics, unwavering devotion to the party in charge. Of course, that could describe virtually all media in this country. The difference is the state actually pays for NPR. NPR was created more than 50 years ago by a law signed by Democrat Lyndon Johnson. It was called the Public Broadcasting Act. And from its very first day, NPR was wholly dependent on tax dollars in order to exist. And it still is. Federal funding is essential to NPR, explains NPR's own website. So there's no factual debate about that fact, but there is a great deal of lying about it. Every year, NPR lobbyists head to Capitol Hill to demand more tax dollars. Democracy can't exist without us, they screech, while simultaneously at the very same time telling you at high volume that NPR takes virtually no tax money. So we don't need federal subsidies, don't even want them really, but you have to increase them. That is NPR's line, and has been for decades under the political leadership of both parties. And it's essentially unchallenged by anyone. It just stays. Wars and recessions come and go, but NPR funding remains. But after more than half a century, it is very clear that there is nothing public about National Public Radio. NPR is the radio station of permanent Washington. That's who pays for it. That's who benefits from it. By adding 3 simple words to NPR's tweets, Elon Musk exposed that forever to the world. Such is the power of truth. It exposes, and of course, it infuriates those who are exposed. So NPR howled in outrage, but with its signature pursed-lipped fussiness. Here's a direct quote from a piece on NPR's website, which really does belong in the Museum of Uptight Liberalism. Quote, NPR officials have asked Twitter to remove the label. They initially assumed it was applied by mistake, NPR spokesperson Isabel Lara said. We were not warned. It happened quite suddenly last night, Lara said. In response to an NPR email for the story seeking comment and requesting details about what in particular might have led to the new designation, Twitter's press account auto-replied with a poop emoji. Well, it's just so perfect you couldn't improve it. Hey, Twitter, stop calling us what we are. Okay, NPR, here's a scat cartoon. So you can forget the rockets and the electric cars. Elon Musk is a hero for this alone. But NPR wasn't finished. It still had fight. National Public Radio was so angry, so enraged to be called state media, that its supporters enlisted the help of the regime's top spokeswoman to claim otherwise. Stop calling it propaganda, said the propagandist. Again, it's an irony-free zone and just too great. Watch this.
there's no doubt of the independence of NPR's journalists. And it has been, if you've ever been on the receiving end of their questions, you know this. You know that they have their independence in journalism. NPR journalists work diligently to hold public officials accountable and inform the American people. The hard-hitting independence nature of their coverage speaks for itself. And so I'll leave it there.
That is so Baghdad Bob. It's unbelievable. Here she is reading a press release for NPR that tells us they're famous for hard-hitting independence, which speaks for itself. Really? How many tough questions have they asked you, Karina Jean-Pierre? Not a single one. They're fluffing her every day. She's so smart. And so she pays them back. Hard-hitting independence. This is the same radio station that in the final days of the last presidential campaign took a look at the biggest political story in years, the New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop, and then ignored it completely. And not only ignored it completely, but because they are fussy and self-righteous to their very core, they bragged about how they were ignoring it completely. We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories, said NPR's managing editor Terrence Samuel. And we don't want to waste listeners and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions. Right. 2 weeks before our presidential campaign, we find out that the Democratic candidate has been taking money from a foreign adversary, but that's just a distraction. So whatever happened to Terrence Samuel? What did he get in return for helping Joe Biden become president at the state-affiliated media network he serves? Well, Terrence Samuel has since been promoted to NPR's executive editor. But he still has time to spare because it's not that hard to put Morning's Edition on the air. So you know what he does in his spare time? Terrence Samuel hosts seminars on, we're quoting, disinformation and democracy. It's something called American University. And no, we're not making any of this up. Nor are we fabricating NPR's report from just last month that informed us male athletes have no inherent performance advantages over female athletes. None at all. That is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. Men and women are physically the same size. They have the same muscle mass. There is no difference whatsoever in their bone structure. We checked with experts. So, as you know, NPR is famous for its widely respected science coverage. But that's not the only reason that NPR is now the go-to news source for unhappy female attorneys over 50. No, there's more to it than that. They're the lifestyle pieces, the features, as they used to say in the newspaper business. Here's a piece, for example, on how one African-American Barbie doll, ahead of its time in the toy industry, changed the life of a Latinx girl forever.
I remember this one Christmas, my cousin's father gifted us all Barbies. And when everyone was unwrapping, you know, the excitement, el papel, the paper, and I opened up the Barbie and my Barbie was black, you know? And everyone kind of like looked at my Barbie and I looked at their Barbies and I could kind of like identify to their Barbies too. And I wasn't this kind of like as melanated as this Barbie. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am different.
Unhappy middle-aged ladies talking about themselves. The narcissism piped directly into your Audi. That's NPR. You got to say they know their audience. They don't only serve their audience, they put their audience on the air. So it's kind of a continuous loop. The snake eating its own tail. So you probably shouldn't be too surprised that with an audience like its, desperately unhappy, barren personal life audience, that NPR is all in on the question of romance novels. Watch.
I'm like really big in the sci-fi ones. One of the books was a gay couple and one of them was a kraken. And I didn't want that to unlock something in me. Unfortunately, it did. Before I knew what was happening, Cyrus was carrying me, the muscular links of his tentacles supporting our combined weight, and shuffling us towards the stall without breaking our kiss. I knew he was strong, but I didn't think he was that strong. You like that, Rollins? He asked, as his tentacles slammed the door to the shower stall open, and we stumbled inside.
Well, so it's tentacle porn. Okay, yeah, I mean, technically it is tentacle porn, which is its own subgenre, and we're not going to pollute your mind by telling you any more about it than that. But what it really is narcissism. because here you have an upper-income Oberlin graduate talking about, what would he be talking about? Well, himself, of course, because that's what NPR listeners want to hear about themselves. And that's the real journalism, the hard-hitting independent journalism Karine Jean-Pierre was touting from the White House briefing room. And NPR didn't just start doing it after they got Joe Biden elected. They've been doing it for generations. Their health coverage in particular stands out. Any news organization can run a piece on how to be more healthy, but only NPR dared to affirm the snack habits of its listeners by telling you, yeah, go ahead and be fat. Here's an anti-diet dietitian.
So diet culture is this overarching system of beliefs and values that's really endemic to Western culture at this point in history.
Christy Harrison is an anti-diet registered dietitian with a master's in public health.
We've been trying to get Christy Harrison, the anti-diet dietitian, on our show for years now, but we're not NPR, so no luck so far. But if you're looking for coverage of LGBTQIA Z+ issues, well, you've come to the right place, because it's not just the conventional stuff, gay marriage or trans issues. They've taken it to another level, as befits a cutting-edge, totally independent news channel like National Public Radio. Here they are reporting on trans dinosaur experts.
Many people who are queer, whether they are trans or some other form of genderqueer or whatever it is, we love dinosaurs.
Along with being a dinosaur expert, Riley is herself transgender. And according to Riley, there is a whole community of genderqueer dinosaur enthusiasts online. We had no idea, so we checked it out. Sure enough, they're there. We found dozens of paleo artists online that identify as queer.
Type dinosaur into the LGBT subreddit, hundreds of results with pride dinos, rainbow dinos, dino moms, dino dads, and a lot of puns. Like Allosaurus.
Transceratops.
Transceratops. Transosaurus rex. Now, a lot of people say if the topic of NPR comes up in conversation, yeah, I'm all for National Public Radio and I'm happy to work an extra day a year to pay for it. But I'm not a trans dinosaur. I'm not. So what's in it for me as a non-trans dinosaur? That seems a little niche. And that's a common misperception about National Public Radio. As long as you're talking about yourself and doing so in a self-satisfied, completely out-of-touch way, NPR is the station for you. In other words, they're interested in all forms of diversity. Back in 2021, NPR discovered a trendy new television show. Why'd they like it? Well, here's why.
Well, Kumari, what TV show were you binging this year?
I was watching We Are Lady Parts. It's a musical comedy about a punk band in London that is made up of all Muslim women.
What are you watching? That's the hard-hitting news coverage that makes the difference between democracy and tyranny. What are you watching? Self-satisfied, fussy people with nose piercings talking about what they're watching inside their tiny little apartments in Brooklyn. Well, I'm watching a musical, an all-Muslim trans musical, a punk band. It's great. So that's NPR in 2023. And the truth is, NPR's always been kind of awful, kind of unbearable, kind of cringy, as they say. But now, you can't even listen to it because the people who work there are deranged. They're ideologues. And ideologues, of course, in the end, go crazy and start attacking each other. The revolution inevitably eats its own. And we're seeing that on display now and, frankly, kind of enjoying it. So after NPR laid off 10% of its staff recently, one NPR show called Louder Than a Riot, Louder Than a Riot, they love riots at NPR, tweeted this, and we're quoting, "The hardest part is that our SZN, if you're not Hungarian, you probably know what that means. We certainly don't. Our SZN is about misgenre queer trans black women face in hip-hop. Yet within NPR, the majority impacted in these layoffs were queer POC staff and programs." In other words, racist! By the way, misgenre, in case you aren't up on your NPR speak, has something to do with bigotry against women who are black. Not that NPR bothers to define any of those terms. Anyway, it gets better. Because once you put crazy people in charge of your newsroom, well, crazy things happen. So they tried to call an all-hands meeting to explain why people were being fired. The real reason, of course, is no one wants to listen to this crap. But an NPR executive had to get out there and try to speak slowly and tell these people why they were fired. And people start screaming at him. So he called for civility. And then one employee said, "You need to read this piece." Quote, "When civility is used as a cudgel against people of color." That's NPR, ladies and gentlemen, on the inside. NPR, by the way, we told you at the outset, is now officially state media. And honestly, that tells you a lot about the state. Vince Colonnese is a radio host in Washington, D.C., a very popular one, deservedly so, and he joins us tonight to assess NPR. Now, you live in Washington, you report on it on the radio. Was there ever a question in your mind that this was state media?
Not at all. Our mutual buddy Chris Plant calls them National Panhandler Radio, appropriately, NPR. And you know what's amazing about this? They're trying to prove that they're not state media, and they're relying on everyone who's funded by the state in order to make that defense. So Karine Jean-Pierre stands there at the White House press briefing and says NPR is so independent. She gives a Braveheart-style speech attesting to their independence. Do you think she would ever do that for Simon Atiba? Like, not in a million years. No. Not in a million years. Of course, it's for NPR. NPR cited Yoel Roth, the former head of censorship at Twitter, as a guy who said they shouldn't be labeled state-affiliated media. Yoel Roth and Twitter at the time were making millions of dollars from the federal government to censor the American public. These are all completely biased people. And one last big thing that I noticed about this, Tucker, they say in all of their defenses, well, only 1% of our funding, less than 1%, comes from the federal government. Even that is deception. Even that is a lie. NPR is a content organization. The 1,000 member stations that they send content to all pay fees to NPR. Guess where they get their money from? That's right, the federal, state, and local governments. As much as 23% of all of their funding comes from there. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, and here they are playing a shell game, and the only type of organization that plays that kind of deceptive shell game, not a news organization, one that is running a political operation on behalf of the government.
It's totally right. NPR is repulsive, but not quite as repulsive as its listeners, the most privileged people in the world demanding welfare from the rest of us. Vince Colonnese, who is on commercial radio, not working for the state. Appreciate seeing you tonight. Thank you.
Good to see you.
A quick programming note. On Tuesday, we'll be heading down to the east coast of Florida to speak to Donald Trump, who's currently the frontrunner in the Republican presidential race, who's just, as you know, indicted this week. This will be Donald Trump's first interview since everything happened, his arraignment in New York. That'll air here, 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday night. So we told you very briefly about this Wisconsin Supreme Court election this week that will determine what the voting laws are in that swing state in the next presidential election. How did the Democrat win despite a history of doing things that most people find totally immoral? Well, there's a reason, and we'll tell it to you after the break. Plus, you'll never guess who the Biden administration is blaming for its disastrous pullout from Afghanistan. Who did that but them? Well, they've got an answer. We'll be right back. This week, as you may have heard, Democrats took control of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and that has major ramifications for the 2024 presidential election in a key swing state, which is why they wanted that seat so badly. So voter ID will be shut down, which will allow fraud. That's the whole point of getting rid of voter ID, to commit more fraud. So how did Democrats win? Well, there are probably a lot of different explanations, but one of them is they benefited from a scheme to pay voters with an app. Fox's Trace Gallagher has the story for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker. So going into the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, the balance of the court was 4-3 leaning conservative. The race was between conservative Judge Dan Kelly and liberal Judge Janet Protasiewicz. Now, a group called Wisconsin Takes Action was offering voters up to $250 to influence their family and their friends to vote. The Wisconsin Takes Action website doesn't mention Protasiewicz by name, but it does say, quote, "We are ready for a progressive majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court." In other words, the group group was betting that voters could do the math. And here's how the deal worked. Wisconsin Takes Action set up an Empower app. If you download the app, you get $30. If you provide 75 names and phone numbers, you get an additional $60 gift card. And each time you reach out to a friend or acquaintance to vote, you get more gift cards until you reach $250. The Wisconsin Republican Party filed a complaint with the State Ethics Commission, and GOP state lawmakers and other groups have called it outright bribery. And Wisconsin statute 1211 appears to support that, saying that it is a violation or bribe for any person who, quoting here, offers, gives, lends, or promises to give or lend or endeavors to provide anything of value. $250 would fall under that anything of value category. It's also notable that in this election, half of Judge Protasiewicz's campaign contributions came from outside the state of Wisconsin. Only 19% of Judge Kelly's came from outside the state. She won, he lost. You will hear more about this. Tucker.
Only 18%. That's unbelievable. Chris Gallagher, thanks for that informative report tonight. Appreciate it. So the pullout from Afghanistan under Joe Biden was one of the most humiliating foreign policy disasters in American history. It's hard to think of one more humiliating. 13 American servicemen killed, thousands of American citizens left behind. Many Afghans died, by the way. Some of them fell off airplanes. Others were blown up in drone strikes for no obvious reason by the Biden administration. And maybe worst of all, we turned the Taliban into the best armed military force after Pakistan in the entire region. Joe Biden did that his first summer as president. So what does the administration have to say about this? Well, in a new report, they take no responsibility whatsoever. Instead, they blame it on, somehow, Donald Trump. So today, Fox's Peter Doocy asked John Kirby, how does that make sense? Watch.
You admit that the intel was bad. So how can President Biden ever trust when they come into the Oval Office with the PDB that anything in there is legit?
What I said was
that intelligence is a mosaic. What if the mosaic, all the pieces are incorrect?
What I said was intelligence is hard business, and they get it right a lot too. There were some pieces here that weren't accurate. This document and this effort isn't about accountability today. This is the next muscle movement in what will be a long process to better understand and comprehend and adjust to what we learned and what we did in Afghanistan.
There were children being killed. There were people hanging off of Air Force jets that were leaving, and you're saying that you guys are proud of the way that this mission was conducted?
Doesn't mean
of that?
Proud of the fact that we got more than 124,000 people safely out of Afghanistan? You bet. Proud of the fact that we now have about 100,000 Afghans, our former allies and partners, living in this country and working towards citizenship? You bet. Does that mean that everything went perfect in that evacuation? Of course not.
Few things more degrading to the reputation, hard-earned reputation of the American Armed Services than having a shameless liar like that man, John Kirby, speaking on its behalf. Joe Kent carried a weapon in combat zones for most of his life. He's a retired Green Beret combat veteran, also a former candidate for Congress. He joins us tonight. Joe Kent, thank you so much for coming on. So what do you, as someone who spent a lot of his life in that region, what do you make of this explanation?
Well, first off, Tucker, all the Democrats and Joe Biden are trying to do right now is avoid accountability, shift it back to President Trump. And that's because House Republicans have finally started putting some pressure on the Biden administration, demanding for accountability. So that's the knee-jerk reaction. But this is a complete and total disgrace. Look, I would have a lot more respect for the Biden administration if they went after the military-industrial complex and the intelligence community for their lies. This all goes back to when President Trump attempted to get us out of Afghanistan. He fought us to the negotiations table. And that's when the intelligence community and the military-industrial complex lied to the American people. They leaked it to the media that Putin had put bounties on the heads of American soldiers, the whole Russian bounty narrative. And then Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, moved to block Trump from spending money to get us out of Afghanistan in the summer-fall timeframe of 2020. We should have been out then. We had a plan. But then Biden came in and he couldn't do Trump's plan. He wanted to get our troops out on his timeline in September 11th of 2021. And the military-industrial complex continued to lie, this time to Joe Biden. You kept hearing those rosy assessments of how the Afghan military was going to hold the ground and they were going to stand and fight for months on end. They lied, and Americans died as a result. Someone must be held accountable.
Yeah. So you know what happened. You personally, Joe Kent, know what happened and almost uniquely are brave enough to tell the truth about it. And this is why they prevented you from winning that seat in Congress in one of the most rotten elections I've ever seen. And so I hope you'll be running again and continuing to tell the truth. Joe Kent, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker. I will.
So you'd think the price of college, since the economy is teetering, would be coming down, but it's higher than ever. So you have to ask, what will happen when artificial intelligence replaces maybe most of the entry-level white-collar jobs that these students are going to college to try to get? Is anyone thinking this through? Mike Rowe is thinking it through. He joins us next. Some people still seem to want to get their kids into Princeton, but you got to wonder what's going to happen to universities. College enrollment dropped nearly 10% since COVID. That's the steepest drop ever. The elite universities obviously are becoming completely intolerant. You would never send your kids there if you thought about it. And they're also more expensive than they've ever been. Brown, which is sort of a college in Providence, Rhode Island, costs $85 grand for 1 year. Other schools in the same category cost $90 grand. So how many of the people who go to these schools and graduate are going to find out the hard way that AI has eliminated their jobs? People should be thinking about this. Mike Rowe is the host of How America Works on Fox Business, and he has thought about it. He joins us tonight. Mike, thanks for coming on. So this is one category of concerns about artificial intelligence. And thank you for bringing this up. It's got to affect the job prospects of kids graduating from these schools, no?
I think it's got to affect everything. And I'm not sure it's a category unto itself. I was thinking of it really in terms of like a cousin to technology and robotics and automation and all of the things that have been hastened, in part, I think, because there's been a big push for a much higher minimum wage than we're accustomed to. But, you know, the unintended consequences of hastening tech has done a lot to eliminate many, many entry-level jobs. This thing feels different to me. This feels like it's coming at it from the other side of the brain. And if it takes root and accelerates the way people are saying it's going to, then I think you're going to see a lot of white-collar jobs eliminated in the same way and at the same time. And as you know, I'm a Pollyanna, always a glass half full kind of guy, and I'm looking for a silver lining in it. And if there is one, maybe that pincer movement will push us back into thinking about making things again on a factory, with a factory state of mind, right? And by the same token, you know, AI is kind of like outsourcing in a way. And my foundation always tries to look at jobs that you can't outsource: plumbing, steam fitting, pipe fitting, welding, and so forth. Maybe we'll start to see the same thing as we get off of Chinese independence, I hope, at least with regard to what we decide to manufacture for ourselves.
So I remember worrying and talking to you years ago about the idea AI would replace, say, truck drivers. But it seems at this point, who knows, but it seems like a bigger threat to junior lawyers.
Yeah, right. Because I think, you know, with truck drivers and pilots and things like that, it's not enough to simply have the tech in place. You're going to have to convince a lot of human beings that it's okay to be driving down the highway and look over and see nobody behind the wheel of the 18-wheeler. That's going to take more time, I think, paradoxically, than the underlying tech will require. To your point, what's going on right now, everything I've read and everybody I've listened to who I respect is talking about this thing on an accelerant unlike anything we've seen before. It's reading our minds, and it's churning out a better work product in many cases than we're capable of. So, you know, I think a lot of people are thinking about tapping the brakes.
Yeah, I hope so. We're going to do a lot more on this, and I hope you'll come back to talk about it. Mike Rowe, thank you.
Anytime.
So Politico is a newsletter based in Northern Virginia that takes millions from creepy big companies to shill for their issues in front of the Congress. Politico calls itself a news organization, but inside, it's really run like NPR. Amber Athey has obtained a list of words political reporters are not allowed to use. And that list includes, well, standbys like mankind and third world countries, biological gender and pro-life. This is part of a much bigger trend that Amber has exposed. Her reporting can be found in the new book, The Snowflakes Revolt, How Woke Millennials Hijacked American Media. She joins us tonight. Amber, thanks so much for coming on, and congrats on the book. So Politico seems or poses as a kind of, I mean, really it's just a corporate shill machine, but it poses as a news organization. How can they ban English language words?
It's truly incredible. I mean, places like the New York Times and the Washington Post get a lot of flack, and rightfully so, but Politico has kind of been flying under the woke radar, and this style guide is really just indicative of a larger trend at that publication. They also brought in several transgender activists to lecture the reporting staff on how they were allowed to write on transgender issues, with one of the individuals who was leading that charge actually telling the reporters that it is a violation of journalistic ethics to report on both sides of the transgender issue. And one reporter was even suggested to have sensitivity readers go over her future articles because she had dared to quote conservatives in an article on transgenderism.
It's crazy how little self-respect they have, or dignity, but do I get to show up at Politico or the Washington Post and tell them they're not allowed to criticize Fox News? I mean, since when are activists allowed to ban criticism of themselves?
It's truly incredible. I mean, the idea that this person would go in, her name is Kate Sozin, by the way. She's with the 13th, which is an LGBTQ advocacy group. She went in lecturing about journalistic ethics. Well, where is the journalistic ethics in even allowing activists to tell reporters how they're allowed to write on issues in the first place? The entire dynamic is totally backwards, and it's all in response to this woke millennial takeover of newsrooms, where the people who we used to deride as snowflakes have now instituted mob politics all across major American institutions, including the media.
That's totally right. That term snowflake never described them accurately. They're thugs. Amber Athey, with a new book out on this topic. I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So artificial intelligence, as you heard in our conversation with Mike Rowe, is accelerating so fast that even some people in the tech business are really worried. But Bill Gates not worried, because he's going to get rich from it. More on that next. So people have been talking at the margins about AI, artificial intelligence, for quite some time, and all of a sudden you have a chance to test it with various chatbots like ChatGPT. And if you have, you know how bizarre and unsettling and honestly amazing but scary this technology is. It's lots of different things. So ChatGPT will lie to you in the service of neoliberal ideology, which is flat out lies. It's supposed to be all-knowing. It's all deceiving, actually. Elon Musk and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak have both called for a 6-month pause on the development of AI because it could end humanity. And they're serious about it. They understand it, and they're really, really worried. But Bill Gates, who founded Microsoft, which is benefiting from AI, says, no way, no pause, onward into the unknown. Eddie Scarry is the author of Liberal Misery. He joins us to decide who's on the right side tonight. Eddie, thanks so much for coming on. So you have two of the biggest names in technology, founders, as they say in Silicon Valley, each taking a polar side of this issue. Who do you think is right?
Well, I think if any of your viewers want to live a happy, healthy, sane life, you can pretty much always do the opposite of whatever Bill Gates says.
We've so seen
we saw during the pandemic that this is a person who is completely motivated and will say whatever it is that's in his own business interest. You know, it's, oh, get the shots, get all the vaccines you can, get 3, get 4, get 5, and as he's lining its pockets with pharmaceutical money. I think that there should be no reason to trust him anymore after that. When he says, and it's not that I put a bunch of faith in these tech overlords like Elon Musk and others, but it turns out that with this technology, what we have seen is the people who are enmeshed in it and saw what was coming, even they were surprised by it. The people who developed this stuff, there were glitches with it. You had these bots saying, "Oh, we're gonna release more viruses on the world. We would like to destroy the world, live independently." And then even the people who created those things say, "Oh, that's just a glitch, and we didn't mean for that to happen. We don't know what that is. We're gonna fix it." I mean, if a 6-month pause is all we can ask for, and Bill Gates says the opposite, no, I think we need to at least take 6 months, at least.
So Elon Musk said something really interesting the other day. He said, for all human history, human beings have had the highest known intelligence. And now we've created something that has higher intelligence than us, and maybe we should think through the consequences of that for a second before proceeding?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think, again, when you have this machine that these people have made, that even they are looking at and saying, wait, we didn't realize it was going to do that. Wait, actually, you played with it for too long. We didn't anticipate that happening. And it's having these conversations in ways that are almost manipulating what we think and what we see and what we know to be true. Yeah, that's a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, if I got in my new car and suddenly it became a submarine without telling me, I'd hang up the car keys for a while and try to figure out what went wrong, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, for sure. Eddie Scary, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we want to end the show tonight with an update from the natural world, which still matters, even with AI. So if you've got a bee infestation, you're probably tempted to just kill all the bees. But there is another option. You don't have to kill all the bees, and actually a lot of bees are dying anyway, so care about the bees, says a bee removal expert who will join us next to explain why you should care about the bees. We'll be right back. The editors at Jeff Bezos' Washington Post spend all day, every day, trying to think up new ways to humiliate and degrade the American population. But this week, they've outdone themselves. Fox's Kevin Corke has a report. Hey, Kevin.
You just never know what you're going to find in the Post, Tucker. Now, critics argue that climate activists have already targeted SUVs and gas-powered cars, gas ranges, even the food you eat, but now they're coming after your bathroom tissue. Sort of. The Post has a climate coach columnist, a guy named Michael Coren. In a provocative column, he advocates that Americans give up on TP and switch to bidets. He says it'll save millions of trees. Now, before you roll your eyes or throw rolls of TP at the TV, apparently sales of bidets have leapt in the U.S. some tenfold since the pandemic. They range in price from $30 to $21 grand. But most Americans don't know a bidet from a beignet. So what gives? Tucker.
I think most Americans don't want to find out, and they go with the pastry over the weird squirting toilet any day. Kevin Corke, great to see you.
You too.
So most people see bees as pests and want to kill them as quickly as they can. Dennis Langlois of Orlando, Florida has a very different approach. He is a humane bee removal expert. He's been doing it for more than a decade. He's known as the bee guy. He joins us to explain why he takes this approach. Dennis, thanks so much for coming on. Well, I see you're protected. So why people see bees, they want to spray them with a can of poison and kill them. Why should they not do that?
Well, two reasons. Number one is, as a homeowner, the last thing you want to do is leave a bee's nest inside your structure. It'll cause more problems than you could ever imagine. And the other reason is because they're honeybees, and so rather than having them killed, there's a beekeeper that would happily remove and relocate those bees, and we do that all day, every day.
So how do you, I'm just assuming that bees don't want to be gentrified and move to a new neighborhood. So how do you convince them to leave?
Well, it's a physical process. So we essentially evict them. We physically remove their nest, putting it into a beehive. And during the process, we use a special vacuum designed to vacuum the bees up and not hurt them. And once they're brought back to the farm, then we relocate the bees from the vacuum with the nest and put everybody back together and put them to work.
How mad are they when they get out of the vacuum?
You'd be surprised at how gentle they are. So most of the time we don't have to wear a suit or a veil or any protective clothing during the entire process.
Because they're just totally defeated? Like they got vacuumed at that point, they just give up? It seems like they should sting you.
No, that's not. No, it's just a matter of knowing the insects and keeping them calm.
How important, and obviously you have a reason to promote bees. I'm very pro-bee myself, I'll just say it. But why are bees important?
Well, they produce 1/3 of the food we eat, at least. And of course, they also make honey, which is a sweet, delicious treat everybody enjoys.
So if any group, if we were to locate any group in the world that produces 1/3 of the food we eat, we'd obviously want to treat them like they were private equity barons or hedge fund managers. Like we'd treat them with a lot of respect. But we don't. Why?
I would think so. I think it's just some people have a fear of bees, and their knee-jerk reaction is when they see a nail, they go get a hammer.
Yeah, I think that's right. Or a can of bug spray. How much honey do you eat?
I eat honey every single day, all the time.
Do you really? You look.
I love it on ice cream.
Yeah. Honey on ice cream, but you're obviously wearing a full suit. We can't really see your outline, but you seem like a pretty slender, fit character. How do you eat honey every day and maintain your girlish figure?
I work hard every day. I wake up at 5 a.m. and I don't stop until about 6 a.m.
Yeah. Well, you're making the world better. Unlike most people. Maybe even talk show hosts. So, Dennis Langlois, our respect to you. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Have a sweet day.
With you too. Well, we are out of time. Unfortunately, I want to remind you we're going to be speaking to the presidential frontrunner on the Republican side who's just been indicted, we believe unfairly, Donald Trump. It'll be Donald Trump's first interview Monday. Artificial intelligence is one of those topics that's just spooky and sci-fi enough to make for a compelling television segment. They love it on the morning shows. But at the same time, AI is complex enough that it's easy to misrepresent. It sounds like something that could be revolutionary, even dangerous to humanity. But is it? And if it is, what should we do about it? Those questions are significant enough that we wanted to find someone who could provide a definitive answer. Elon Musk seemed like the right person. Musk has been thinking about AI and worrying about it for most of his life. Nearly a decade ago, he helped found a nonprofit research project called OpenAI, and the point was in the name. If we're going to have artificial intelligence, and apparently we are, it ought to be open to the world. That would help ensure that it's used for good and not evil. That was the idea. But as the years passed and Musk found himself preoccupied building a couple of enormous companies, SpaceX and Tesla, OpenAI got away from him. As of tonight, OpenAI is no longer open. It's not a nonprofit research project dedicated to using artificial intelligence to serve humanity. It is instead a commercial enterprise backed by Microsoft and controlled to some extent by the Democratic Party. Elon Musk thinks that's a problem. In fact, he believes it's a threat to human civilization, tantamount to, maybe even more terrifying than, thermonuclear weapons. The conversation you're about to see took place recently in a hotel room in Los Angeles. We think it's important enough that we're going to play the entire thing for you over the course of tonight and tomorrow. Here's how the conversation began. So all of a sudden AI is everywhere. People who weren't quite sure what it was are playing with it on their phones. Is that good or bad?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about AI for a long time, since I was in college, really. It was one of the things that, the sort of 4 or 5 things I thought would really affect the future dramatically. It is fundamentally profound in that the smartest creatures, as far as you know, on this earth are humans, is our defining characteristic.
Yes.
We're obviously weaker than, say, chimpanzees and less agile, but real smarter. So now what happens when something vastly smarter than the smartest person comes along in silicon form? It's very difficult to predict what will happen in that circumstance. It's called the singularity. It's, it's a singularity like a black hole, because you don't know what happens after that. It's hard to predict. So I think we should be cautious with AI, and we should, I think there should be some government oversight, because it affects it's a danger to the public. And so when you have things that are a danger to the public, like let's say, so food and drugs. That's why we have the Food and Drug Administration, right, and the Federal Aviation Administration, the FCC. We have these agencies to oversee things that affect the public, where there could be public harm. And you don't want companies cutting corners on safety, and then having people suffer as a result. So that's why I've actually for a long time been a strong advocate of AI regulation. So that I think regulation is It's not fun to be regulated. It's somewhat arduous to be regulated. I have a lot of experience with regulated industries because obviously automotive is highly regulated. You could fill this room with all the regulations that are required for a production car just in the United States, and then there's a whole different set of regulations in Europe and China and the rest of the world. So very familiar with being overseen by a lot of regulators. And the same thing is true with rockets. You can't just willy-nilly, shoot rockets off, not big ones anyway, because the FAA oversees that. And then even to get a launch license, there are probably half a dozen or more federal agencies that need to approve it, plus state agencies. So I've been through so many regulatory situations. It's insane. And sometimes people think I'm some sort of like regulatory maverick that sort of defies regulators on a regular basis, but this is actually not the case. Once in a blue moon, rarely I will disagree with regulators, but the vast majority of the time, my companies agree with the regulations and comply. Anyway, so I think we should take this seriously, and we should have a regulatory agency. I think it needs to start with a group that initially seeks insight into AI, then solicits opinion from industry, and then has proposed rulemaking, and then those rules, will probably, hopefully, grudgingly be accepted by the major players in AI, and I think we'll have a better chance of advanced AI being beneficial to humanity in that circumstance.
But all regulations start with a perceived danger. Planes fall out of the sky, or food causes botulism.
Yes.
I don't think the average person playing with AI on his iPhone perceives any danger. Can you just roughly explain what you think the dangers might be?
Yeah, so the danger, really, AI is perhaps more dangerous than, say, mismanaged aircraft design or production maintenance or bad car production, in the sense that it has the potential, however small one may regard that probability, but it is non-trivial. It has the potential of civilizational destruction. There's movies like Terminator, but it wouldn't quite happen like Terminator, because the intelligence would be in the data centers.
Right.
The robot's just the end effector. But I think perhaps what you may be alluding to here is that regulations are really only put into effect after something terrible has happened.
That's correct.
If that's the case for AI, and we only put in regulations after something terrible has happened, it may be too late to actually put the regulations in place. The AI may be in control at that point.
You think that's real? It is conceivable that AI could take control and reach a point where you couldn't turn it off, and it would be making the decisions for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, that's definitely where things are headed, for sure. I mean, the things like say ChatGPT, which is based on GPT-4 from OpenAI, which is a company that I played a critical role in creating, unfortunately.
Back when it was a nonprofit?
Yes. I mean, the reason OpenAI exists at all is that Larry Page and I used to be close friends, and I would stay at his house in Palo Alto, and I would talk to him late into the night about AI safety. And at least my perception was that Larry was not taking AI safety seriously enough.
What did he say about it?
He really seemed to be one sort of digital superintelligence, basically digital God, if you will, as soon as possible.
He wanted that?
Yes. He's made many public statements over the years that the whole goal of Google is what's called AGI, artificial general intelligence, or artificial superintelligence. And I agree with him that there's great potential for good, but there's also potential for bad. And so if you've got some radical new technology, you want to try to take the set of actions that maximize the probability it will do good and minimize the probability it will do bad things.
Yes.
It can't just be hell for leather to just go, barreling forward and hope for the best. And then at one point, I said, well, what about, we're going to make sure humanity's okay here. And then he called me a speciesist.
Did he use that term?
Yes. And there were witnesses. I wasn't the only one there when he called me a speciesist. And so I was like, okay, that's it. Yes, I'm a speciesist. Okay. You got me. What are you? Yeah, I'm fully a speciesist. Busted. So that was the last straw. At the time, Google had acquired DeepMind, and so Google and DeepMind together had about 3/4 of all the AI talent in the world. They obviously had a tremendous amount of money and more computers than anyone else. So I'm like, okay, we have a unipolar world here where there's just one company that has close to a monopoly on AI talent and computers, like scaled computing. And the person who's in charge doesn't seem to care about safety. This is not good. So then I thought, what's the furthest thing from Google would be like a non-profit that is fully open, because Google is closed for profit. So that's why the open in OpenAI refers to open source, transparency, so people know what's going on.
Yes.
And that we don't want to have like while I'm normally in favor of for-profit, we don't want this to be sort of a profit-maximizing demon from hell.
That's right.
That just never stops.
Right.
So that's how OpenAI would.
So you want speciesist incentives here, incentives that.
Yes,
like,
I think we want pro-human.
Yeah.
Let's make the future good for the humans.
Yes.
Yes, because we're humans.
So can you just put it? I keep pressing you, but just for people who haven't thought this through and aren't familiar with it, and the cool parts of artificial intelligence are so obvious. Write your college paper for you, write a limerick about yourself.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot there that's fun and useful. But can you be more precise about what's potentially dangerous and scary? Like what could it do? What specifically are you worried about?
Going with old sayings, the pen is mightier than the sword. So if you have a super intelligent AI that is capable of writing incredibly well and in a way that is very influential, convincing, and is constantly figuring out what is more convincing to people over time, and then enters social media, for example, Twitter, but also Facebook and others, and potentially manipulates public opinion in a way that is very bad. How would we even know?
How do we even know? So to sum up, in the words of Elon Musk, for all human history, human beings have been the smartest beings on the planet. Now human beings have created something that is far smarter than they are. And the consequences of that are impossible to predict. And the people who created it don't care. In fact, as he put it, Google founder Larry Page, a former friend of his, is looking to build a, quote, digital god, and believes that anybody who's worried about that is a speciesist. In other words, is looking out for human beings first. Elon Musk responded, as a human being, it's okay to look out for human beings first. And then at the end, he said the real problem with AI is not simply that it will jump the boundaries and become autonomous and you can't turn it off. In the short term, the problem with AI is that it might control your brain through words. And this is the application that we need to worry about now, particularly going into the next presidential election. The Democratic Party, as usual, was ahead of the curve on this. They've been thinking about how to harness AI for political power. More on that next.